In Syria, the unfolding battle for the commercial capital, Aleppo, has turned into the focal point of the 16-month-long conflict. Government forces are pushing to reclaim the country's largest city from the rebels, who control nearly half of its neighbourhoods. 3 million people live there in Aleppo, and many are now fleeing amid international fears of a looming massacre. Russia has accused foreign powers of fueling the bloodshed by urging the rebels to fight on against Assad. The political leaders of the insurgency are calling for intervention and shipments of heavy weapons from abroad. And revelations in the media this week claim that is already happening via a secret base in Turkey. Well, for more on the story, I'm joined from London by author and journalist Afshin Rattansi. Well, the battle for Aleppo is largely seen as a litmus test of whether the Syrian government still got the strength to hold on to power. Afshin, is the Assad regime entering its final chapter now, do you think?
Well, my understanding is the fighting is still going on in Aleppo, but of course what you were talking about earlier, this call for weapons that some from the Syrian National Council have been making in Abu Dhabi, this is getting worse and worse, and the blowback for these countries that are already aiding the Islamist fighters is astounding. I mean, as far as I understand it, parts of northern Syria are already under the control of Kurds. They're calling it Western Kurdistan, parts of northern Syria. I don't think the Turkish authorities will be happy with that. And as for the blowback for the United States, last time they went around doing this, arming these jihadists, sending special forces and so forth, we got September the 11th, 2001, and the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and the White House.
Well, with those Kurdish implications, is there a chance that Turkey itself could be drawn into a much wider conflict then? Bearing in mind, of course, Kurds are in various other countries in the region.
It's unbelievable that the Turkish authorities can't understand the blowback from their support for these rebels on their own border. It's amazing. Do they just never learn? As for the United States and NATO nations, you know, one doesn't want to sectarianize it the way the international media do, but you never see on corporate stations anything about the Christians. That suicide bomb that killed the Syrian defense minister, that guy was a Christian. Apparently, as far as I understand it, thousands, I have a figure here, 50,000 Christians fleeing from homes because of American and European-backed Islamism in Syria.
Afshin, what about this question of the rebels demanding more weapons and international intervention? Many, including you, of course, are saying that they're already getting that support, but will they now get more? Because clearly they're desperate, they need more support. Despite what Russia and China say, will they get more?
Well, the Saudis are obviously, and the Qataris are obviously sending in their arms across the borders. Interesting that Saudi Arabia is also having problems at home. I don't think you'll see the mainstream media wanting to cover problems in Saudi Arabia, that oil superpower in the oil-rich east of the country. They will no doubt get the arms, and I noticed that the Syrian foreign minister being over in Tehran at the moment, already the American press talking about Syria's WMD and the chemical weapons. I don't think this time around the West are going to intervene using their armies. They're going to go the proxy way they did in Afghanistan.
What do you make of the weakness then of the UN? Moscow believes Syria's government won't willingly give in to the rebels. Neither side's going to back down. The UN, that observer peace mission, obviously hasn't worked. Is it completely powerless and a waste of time?
I think the important thing here is that Russia, China, most of Latin America, huge swathes of Africa, it's them basically against a few European nations in America. So the US and these few EU nations are isolated now. So presumably Assad will continue. Let's hope he doesn't continue making the kinds of mistakes he's been making time after time. Perhaps he thinks he's his father. The widespread killing of civilians by the Assad regime is inexcusable.
You mentioned
as a means of quashing this rebellion.
Sure. You mentioned chemical weapons a little earlier. Is that not really a very good reason why the UN and NATO should perhaps get involved, because of that risk has now been raised that chemical weapons could be used by the Assad regime?
Well, I presume that if you have chemical weapons, you use them as a last resort, and that last resort would be intervention, public intervention by the EU or the United States. So I think, again, we have that deterrent now. So it looks like the Assad government will continue in power, trying its best to destroy all those pockets of urban poor who have been drawn to Salafism and extremism of the kind we don't want to see in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, just briefly, if Assad doesn't survive, if he doesn't continue in power, just give us your view of the much wider implications when that power vacuum suddenly appears there in Syria.
Oh, a power vacuum would be devastating. Ironically, you'd even have Zionists over the border from Syria, over the border from those Golan Heights, probably praying as much as they can that the Assad regime continues, because the implications for the Middle East would be cataclysmic. And luckily, I don't think that's actually going to happen.
Well, we've talked about it a lot in the past. No doubt we'll talk more about it in the future. Afshin, great to hear your thoughts. Thanks very much indeed for joining us live there in London. Afshin Rattansi there.